Yes, well, I'm trying to assist fire and rescue services across the country and also elsewhere in the world, particularly New Zealand and Australia, to deal with fires involving large lithium-ion batteries, which include things like electric vehicle fires and grid-scale battery energy storage fires, and indeed explosions, because there is a finite explosion risk associated with these devices as well.
Devon and Somerset Fire Service are now looking into this risk as part of their kind of future planning. Are fire services a bit behind the curve with this, or is it because it's a new technology, they're now just exploring how best to tackle fires involving these batteries? And do you feel they're making enough progress at this moment?
Everybody is on a steep learning curve, and everybody is at the bottom of a steep learning curve, not just fire and rescue services. All stakeholders need to have education at least and training at best on how to use lithium-ion batteries safely, and also how to, for example, dispose of them, and in case of first responders, how to deal with them when they've gone into thermal runaway and they're facing fires, explosions, or a toxic vapor cloud.
Can you talk me through some of the research you've done on this issue? Because I understand you've done experiments as well, haven't you?
Yes, indeed. My team at Newcastle University have done a number of experiments. We worked at RAF Spadeadam on the DMV site in January of 2020, then at the Fire Services College in March of 2020. During these experiments, we realized that what people had been thinking was either smoke or steam that was produced by lithium-ion batteries when they're in thermal runaway was actually a vapor cloud, and therefore susceptible to vapor cloud explosion. So we then did 3 weeks of experiments in spring of this year, again at the DNV site at RAF Spadeadam, where we were researching this issue more closely and in more depth. We tried to detonate the vapor cloud, which we succeeded on 1 or 2 occasions, but we were also trying to understand more about it, about its production. And so, for example, we discovered that you seem to get 2 types of vapor cloud when lithium batteries go into thermal runaway: a heavier than air and a lighter than air form. And which dominates, we're not quite sure yet, but it seems to be dependent to a certain extent on the actual chemistry of the lithium-ion battery. And in all the experiments we've done, we've quite often had fire and rescue services present, and the findings we tend to then try and use to assist fire and rescue services in dealing with situations involving large lithium-ion batteries.
What would be the next steps then? What do fire services generally and emergency services generally need to understand?
All first responders, that's fire and rescue, ambulance, police, paramedics, etc., they all need to understand that the risks and hazards that they face. The first hazard is obviously fire. When lithium-ion batteries go into thermal runaway, they vent this white vapor cloud, which, if it catches fire immediately, ignites immediately. You get long flare-like flames. However, if it doesn't ignite immediately, not only do you have the toxic risk, but also you've got this hazard of potential explosion, or rather deflagration. And so they need to understand what they're facing. So, for example, if a first responder, usually the police, comes across a electric vehicle in a road traffic collision, and it starts to hiss, or they hear a popping sound, or it starts to emit white vapor, they need to be aware that that's the vapor cloud, that it's toxic, flammable, and potentially explosive, and they need to take appropriate actions.
Have you been impressed by the way the emergency services have come together to look into this? Obviously, you're working closely with them. You're providing consultancy and advice to them at a very high level. It seems to me that they are taking this issue very seriously. Have we been able to filter advice down to people that, as you mentioned before, the first responders? Do they already have some idea of the best practice when they're called to this type of incident?
Sadly, not across the whole of the UK. First responders, fire and rescue, are brilliant, and I have thoroughly enjoyed working with them. but it's been a long, slow slog because they're getting no direction from government. The National Fire Chiefs is trying to do its best, and it has an online digital learning package, and it's constantly working to improve the situation, to try and get more and more information out there. And when I contact an individual fire and rescue service, always they respond very positively. They really welcome my input, and they're great to work with, receptive, and put what we discuss into practice. But it is a major challenge because of the sheer diversity of the ways in which we rely upon lithium-ion batteries, not just mobile phones and laptops, but electric vehicles, e-scooters, e-mopeds, e-bikes. Then we've got domestic battery energy storage systems, and then we've got grid scale battery energy storage systems, and then we have ships that are both hybrid and actually battery powered, and even hybrid electric aircraft. They are everywhere. And when we have an incident involving a lithium-ion battery in any of these different fields, they represent some challenges that are the same, but a whole host of new challenges. And as I said, these challenges can vary depending upon what device the lithium-ion battery is in. And that's a massive learning curve, a very steep learning curve for all first responders. And indeed, if we look at the public, please stop dropping your lithium-ion batteries or your mobile phones into the waste, because when they get to the recycling facility, they cause fires. And such fires are costing this country about £160 million a year. And luckily, they haven't killed or injured anybody yet, unlike other countries.
What would you like to see happen next? You touched on, you'd like the government to take a lead. Is it for the government to do something? What do you think? What would your best practice next steps be if you could make the decision?
The first thing to do is to make sure all first responders are appropriately funded, have the right PPE, personal protective equipment, and the right training. The next thing is that we need a general education campaign, which should be government-led, to all stakeholders, and starting with the public. We also need actually to educate and train those that make important decisions. For example, councils. Local councils now have the power to grant planning permission for grid-scale battery energy storage systems of any size. And local councils, just like everybody else, don't know enough about lithium-ion batteries and the risks and hazards involved to take an appropriate and detailed and informed view of such planning applications. And the danger is that we will have grid-scale battery energy storage systems, for example, that should there be an incident, the fire and rescue services will just find it impossible to deal with, because they don't include things like fire hydrants or enough fire hydrants, or there's not sufficient and easy access to the site, etc. So I think there needs to be a government-led initiative here. And we need to educate all stakeholders and do so as a matter of urgency, actually.